With these introductory remarks complete, I will turn the presentation over to Mr. Brian Olson, Director of Power Security Solutions at AbleOne.
Sensitive IBM data at rest and in motion. I trust during these trying times with the pandemic that we all face and the rise in cyber threats that we are seeing, that everybody is staying healthy and remaining vigilant. I will kick off today's webinar with a few slides before I turn things over to our key speakers from Precisely. As mentioned, this is a 1-hour webinar that will be full of, we hope, valuable information and insights for you on this topic. We will discuss why it is important in today's environment to secure your sensitive corporate data, both at rest as well as in motion. Today's webinar, as I mentioned, is a collaboration between AbleOne and Precisely, who has been our IBM security partner for over 15 years. Okay, a little bit about AbleOne for those that are not aware. We are an end-to-end IT solutions provider. We provide one-stop shopping to deliver a full array of IT procurement, management, and consulting services. And those solutions include network architecture, cloud design, migration and management, remote managed services, disaster recovery, backup, security, and many more things. For the last 30 years, we have been IBM I implementation and support specialists. And for the last 15 years of that time, we have been helping our IBM I customers secure their IBM I environments and meet their compliance requirements. Our IBM I security solutions include Assure Security from Precisely. So Assure is a best-of-breed security solution with functionality covering compliance monitoring, access control, and data privacy on the IBM I. We also provide a solution called Enforcement Security for IBM I, also from Precisely, which is a comprehensive and integrated security suite for IBM I with a Windows-based GUI management interface. And lastly, we offer AbleOne IBM I risk assessment services. So that is a detailed IBM I risk assessment against IBM best practices for security on IBM I. And for that, we use tools from IBM Lab Services to deliver those services. So why now should we have this webinar on IBM I data security? Why is it important? Obviously, through the pandemic period, we are seeing increased cyber threats that we all have to be worried about, but also there are increased regulatory and corporate focus on breach protection through a variety of different regulations, and those regulations can impose severe penalties and also disclosure requirements for any breaches that happen. These disclosures can result in huge financial and also brand impacts. And so as such, encrypting your sensitive data, either at rest or in motion, is probably one of the most frequent areas of interest that we get from our customers over the last couple of years. So with that, I would like to turn over the reins of this presentation over to our friends at Precisely, Bill Hammond, who's the Senior Product Marketing Manager, and Rich Marco, who's a Professional Services Director for Precisely.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate that. This is Bill Hammond, and I'll be covering the first part of the presentation, then I'll be handing off to Rich to cover a little bit more. Let's take a quick look at kind of how we're going to go through the information here. So today's topic. So first of all, I'm going to spend a few minutes really just talking about what Brian teed up, this need for data privacy, and a little bit of more context on what's driving the marketplace to be so concerned about the data privacy issues. And then Rich is going to take you through a number of different techniques and technologies that are all focused on data privacy and protecting that data at rest. And then also, as Brian just pointed out, the data that's in motion as you're transferring data back and forth between your business partners or clients or whatever. That's a really critical area as well. And I'll talk a little bit about Precisely's product and how we can help you. And we should have some time for the end with Q&A. So be sure to enter your questions in the Q&A box there that's available all during the presentation. Quickly, by way of introduction, with Precisely, it may be a new name for some of you. Precisely is the new name of a company that's the combination of SyncSort and a division of Pitney Bowes called Pitney Bowes Software and Data. And we consider ourselves really as the leader in the data integrity space. We're all about making sure people's data is, available, secure. We have tools that can augment data or enrich data, data quality, data governance, all things in those areas. And the combined entity is a fairly large company, as you can see, with over 12,000 customers and a lot of people in the Fortune 100. Really do business all over the world, and we're about 2,000 employees. Just to give you a quick feel for, I'm not going to go into every product we have, obviously, but our product line kind of divides into a couple of different areas. We've got a lot of data integration capabilities and really data protection with security and high availability. We have products on the mainframe and the IBM I, and also other platforms as well with that product suite. Then we've got a group of products that we call our Verify products, which is all about data cleansing, discovery, and things like that, data governance I mentioned. Location data, which is becoming critically important as an area for a lot of data sets wanting to know the geographic information about it. So you can do things like routing and visualize your customers across a geographic area and things like that. And then finally, that element of enriching the data. So if you've got, say, demographic data or some geographic data and you want to add things to it, like points of interest or more demographic attributes, things like that, we have products and actually data that you can acquire from us to augment the data that you already have. So Precisely is very much focused on making sure that the data that our companies are using are driving their better decisions by making sure that data is higher quality and has a higher degree of integrity. So with the commercial out of the way, Assure Security. We have, as Brian pointed out, that's one of the security products that we have here at Precisely. I break it down a little bit here on this chart to kind of point out that it's very broad in terms of what Assure Security covers, but there's focus on access control, compliance and monitoring, and also data privacy. And that's where we're going to focus today, is really on the data privacy side of things. And we're really going to break that up, as we've already discussed, into two specific areas: protecting the data that is at rest, and that'll be a conversation about the encryption and some of those other technologies. And then also data in motion, where we'll be talking more about the elements of file transfer and securing those file transfers. So data privacy, really, when we look at what's driving this, what's the important elements that are causing people to be more concerned about this than, say, they used to be. Data is just a more high visibility thing. People are constantly reporting breaches. You have to publicize those things in a very public way. It can be very damaging to your company. There's also elements of, the quality of your service and everything else is viewed on how you deal with data, particularly customers' data, where their privacy elements are being more and more scrutinized. This has become the subject of a lot of the regulations, even some that you may have, be familiar with that aren't brand new, things like HIPAA. Now, that's been around for a long time. That's really specifically talking about health records, personal health information. GDPR, relatively recently, anybody that does any business in Europe has to deal with the privacy regulations around that, the GDPR regs. PCI DSS, that one's very concerned about encryption of financial data, in particular payment cards, credit cards and debit cards, things like that. So there's elements of data privacy and encryption that are embedded in those requirements. CCPA was something that just started being enforced this year. It's a California Consumer Privacy Act. And again, it's similar to GDPR with some important differences, but again, specifically calls out the mandate for companies that are doing business in California, or with anybody that lives in California, the ways that they have to handle that data and protect that data. Another element that's driving some of these privacy issues is understanding that, data privacy, the access to your data or people accessing your data can come from inside your company as well as outside your company. You need to make sure that you're protecting your data, not just from external attacks or, external people with bad intentions, but also, internal staff in some cases, certainly your contractors that have access to your network systems and your business partners, you have to be worried about their access to that information as well as the, what I call the outside actors, other criminal intruders. So there's a lot of factors that are driving people to be more focused on their data privacy. Mention these health insurance, or the regulations. The one particularly concerned about health, I just want to highlight these purple boxes, the areas that we talk about that are relative to the data privacy side. This one talks specifically about encryption and key management, which Rich is going to talk to you in more detail about, and also specifically calls out you have to prove that you've got protection for those data transfer, that data in motion. On the payment card industry regulation, that specifically talks about the ability to protect credit card numbers and the personally identifiable information that go along with them. Again, key management is mentioned, as is the encryption of data in motion. As you can imagine, there's a lot of credit card information flying around the internet at all times with as much e-commerce that's going on, people doing internet banking. There's just a huge degree of focus on payment card information. And I mentioned the California Consumer Privacy Act actually was implemented and went effective in January, and as of July 1st, they're starting to actually enforce some of these regulations, and we'll start to see penalties coming out as later in the year for people that haven't met the standards. But the CCPA specifically talks about pseudonymizing personal information, and that's another word for encryption, and also making sure that any personal information is masked or obscured, so that if someone were to see it, they can't really understand it or read it. And these are capabilities that Rich will be talking to you about here in just a second. So those are just 3 of the statutes. There's a number of them I could go into, and almost all of them talk about the need for the protection of data both at rest and in motion. So at this point, I'm actually going to pass, or maybe Melanie, I'll ask you if you could pass control to Rich so he could take over. There we go.
So this is Rich Marco, Professional Services Director for Precisely. So we're going to talk about data at rest first. So there's really 4 different areas that I'm going to be covering. The first being encryption, and then tokenization and anonymization and masking. So a little bit about encryption. What it's all about is transforming readable information to an unreadable format. It's all about the algorithms and the key management, right? So there's many different algorithms out there, and there's keys, and keys are the most important. Having those secured and also validated is a requirement on a lot of the regulations. The algorithms are known out there, so that really the keys are the big thing. So with our product, and on the IBM I, in version 7.1 of the OS, IBM added what's called field proc. So it's really a field level exit point. This was something that IBM had on the mainframe side, but finally got to the IBM I side. So by being able to add a program to the field, IBM, gave us that option, which then we were able to implement our encryption algorithms and programs, and really work with IBM, because it's really being done at the database layer, that the program gets called if a field, if a record is accessed that has the field proc on it. What's nice about this is that most of the time applications don't need any changes. It's all being done at the database layer. It's also that the database type, you know, field size, that kind of stuff does not have to be altered. So, you know, there's many different data types. I think later on I have a more detailed slide, but, you know, regular character, zone, packed, you know, that's definitely not an issue for encryption. So this just talks a little bit more detail, you know, within a database definition, you have the type, the length, the description, and now field proc is there. It will call the program that's connected on a read, write, or update. We support most of the data types, and in the middle column, you see the list there. There are some constraints for date and time if you're using default values, but if it's just a date field or a time field that does not have a default value, then no issue there as well. With encryption, you can usually also mask the data, right? Showing the last, 4 digits of a social credit card number or social security number. And depending, there's different ways to mask, right? So mask the front, the back, mask everything. So different options that are available. And this would be in addition to encrypting the data, right? So the data at rest with this solution will be encrypted. Some more technical stuff here. So if the encrypted field is the key to the record, that is something we would need to take a look at. This gets us into the area that possibly the program might need a very small change. We have a solution for this situation. We call it OAR. It's open access for RPG. This would only be if you're using more legacy versions of RPG. If you are using the SQL query engine, then everything is fine, no issues. You'll be able to access through the key, which is encrypted. But if it's more the older RPG, RPG3, that kind of stuff, you'll have to upgrade to RPG ILE and then implement our OR solution, which all you really need to do is update one line of code inside of the program. You will need to recompile the program. And it's really just a kind of an exit to our program that needs to be connected. And, we're able to work then with the encrypted indexes. So, what's the advantages or challenges of encryption, right? So advantages, better performance, confidence that you're meeting the requirements of the regulations, easily, more easily implemented than trying, years ago, there were companies out there doing encryption without field proc. So that's, you definitely would need to be changing programs, using APIs every time you're accessing a file. So none of that is needed, right, with field proc. We also are able to encrypt IFS files, backups, spool files, using the same technology, within the tool, there's that capability. So there is the possibility of accessing that type of data, which may have sensitive, information. So encrypting that may be needed. Some of the challenges is about the performance. There will be, as you could imagine, a little bit of a performance hit because you are decrypting the data depending on the person's access, masking it if that's what you're also implementing. But keep in mind, we are working hand in hand with IBM, right, with the exit point, with FieldProc, and it's all being done at the database layer. So it's really not an application program, the high level. It's really down, in the operating system where this work is getting done. The thing about the RPG applications I already talked about. So there are some things that we would need to talk through, but we've had many customers implementing encryption, and depending on the needs, a little bit of professional services, may be needed. This is just an illustration. I don't really want to go into too much detail, but what it's all about is that, if you have 3 different files and you have different fields within those files, you can have separate keys connected to different fields. And each one of those keys can have different policies on what the person is able to see or not see. So you're able to have an overall default policy. So that could be for most people what you want them to be able to see. An individual user or use a group profile. So, it could be members of a group profile having a certain access to the data, and also supplemental groups. So, any of those can be set up so that either you're seeing the data or not, or it's masked and you see, a portion of the real data. So just to talk about the key manager a little bit. So key managers, have been around. I think there's some more slides about one that we promote. But the product itself, our product does come with an internal key manager. But if your company has an external key manager, we can probably work with that as long as it's KMIP compliant. So we're able to do that. There are benefits to having an external key manager, but keep in mind that we would then need to go out to that key manager to get the key, to decrypt and all of that. It's cached and that kind of stuff, so it's not like every access to a record we need to get the key, but there is, some overhead for that. So, we've run into it, and Brian, asked that I talk a little bit about disk encryption. So disk encryption is really a different technology, right? So it's not down at the field level. You really are encrypting the full disk. So, there are regulations that may say, any type of encryption, might be okay. But what this is really if someone, takes a disk drive, the data is going to be encrypted and they would not be able to decrypt it without the key. But within the system, everybody has access. So any user ID on the system, if you're accessing, data in a file, you're going to have full access to the data. No masking, no full mask or anything like that. So it's really at a higher level, and it could be important, right, to have disk encryption if there is a concern. Maybe if you're off-site for your storage, but really to get down to details, to be able to say, well, I have certain people that I want to have full access to the data. I have some people that I want to give masked access to the data. And then other people, I don't want them to see anything. That can really only be done at field level encryption. Okay, so that's the big difference. I would definitely be promoting field level encryption, especially what Bill brought up. It's not only external people, looking for this data. It could be internal people. So the full disk encryption is really not going to help you in that area. So now tokenization. Tokenization is really replacing the data with a token, right? So it's a string, numeric or alphabetic, that takes the place of a value within your file. Now, with tokenization, there are products that only replace, and you can't go back to the original. Now, our product is reversible. So if we are making it reversible, then we're going to store the real values, the original values, in a token vault, and that will be secured, and it can also be encrypted, so that the data can be reversed. So there's certain needs that you may need to reverse, and there's others that it may be okay to just have the token. I think on one of Bill's slides, it talked about having aggregate data, and it needs to be tokenized. So tokenization can do that. If you have the need to reverse, then our solution for tokenization would be the way that you go. Tokenization also has the capability to, when it's replacing the values, to make it a value that will pass internal validation checks. So for instance, a Visa number, even though it's not the right number, it will pass any sort of validation that's within your programs. So that's built in. And to display the data, you might have field edits, right? Edit word or edit codes. So you want to make sure that the data is going to be able to be presented in that way. So tokenization can do that. So some tips here. You might have data on a backup system, on a QA system, and if you're doing an overall risk assessment for the data, if you tokenize the data, you may be able to remove that system from your full enterprise risk assessment. So that's something to keep in mind, that on a QA system or a development system, you might need the files, right, to be able to develop or test your applications, but it doesn't have to be the production data. So that's one of the benefits of being able to tokenize. With that, it talks here that cannot be reversed our capabilities can do both. So we can set it up that it's non-reversible. There's no token vault or anything. So, there's no way to get back to the original. And the other thing about tokenization is we will replace, if it's the same value in multiple records, it will be the same, right? So each token will be propagated throughout the database if it is, the same value. So this is good for, BI applications, queries, where you don't need to show the, the sensitive data. So I probably talked about most of this already. So, talking about the Assure Encryption product, preserving the characteristics of the data, storing the data in a token vault that's secure, being able to also mask the data. So even if it's tokenized, we can also mask it. So you're seeing only, certain portions of the field, for a certain group of people. And being able to maintain the relationships, that's what I was talking about, the field being the same in multiple records, even though it's been tokenized, and being able to remove, possibly a production server or, a QA server to remove it from the scope of a compliance regulation. So now anonymization is another one of our products. And what this is all about is, anonymizing data, but this is only, it is not reversible. Okay, so with this tool, you're not able to go back. So this is good for that situation that you're sending data maybe to a third party or marketing firm or things like that, where you want to anonymize the data, and there's no need to reverse it back. Okay, there is no token vault; it's not required. It does still preserve the characteristics of the original data. It will replace it throughout the database, just like tokenization. It's definitely not a solution for a production server because it's not reversible. But there are, cases that this may be a better solution. So, what I would say, looking at encryption, that's the one that's going to take more time, right? So it's decrypting, and then when the record is written back, it has to encrypt it again. That type of stuff is not happening with tokenization and anonymization. Definitely not an anonymization. Tokenization depends on the reversible or not. But these two would be quicker than encryption, full-blown encryption. So some of the tips here, cannot be reversed with a key, no algorithm, relationship is not a solution for your production server. Used to anonymize data, development or test systems. Good for scrubbing data, as I said, for outside services. This points it right to GDPR or CCPA. This could be a solution for that. Could also be coupled with high availability, so that you're able to then anonymize the data as it's going over to the HA system, right? So let's say the HA system is really a development or test system. So now anytime a record gets added to the production data, we could keep it in sync, but anonymize it on the other system, right? So this tool does have that capability. And GDPR does state that that's needed. The last thing here is masking. So this is really part of the other solutions. I think it's important to call it out, to be able to see a portion of the real data it could be needed. Last 4, front 6. It can be masked, and it could be connected to certain people, right? So it's not like, okay, masking is overall, everybody sees the data mask, or or they don't. That's not the case. It could be very specific. So depending on the person's role in the company, they may see the data, decrypted fully, see it in plain text, or they may see a portion of the real field, so that, the original data, so that they can, verify the person, or, know that they have the right person on the line, or whatever it might be. Managing masking should be an easy task. So that's something, if you are looking at other solutions, masking is something that should be available, should be easy to implement, and be done, be able to be done by user, or, groups of people. So masking, as I said, again, separation of duties, so different people see different masking. Being able to mask data may be a way to allow people to see the data unprotected, but only a portion of it, right? But it doesn't overall, protect the data from a breach, but it is an option. So with Assure Security, data is decrypted or detokenized only. The portion of the field that's needed is shown to the person. Final 4, this is just really rehashing, everything I've gone through. Yeah, so I've covered all of this already. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about file transfer, secure file transfer. So this is for the data in motion. And I guess the first thing I want to say is, if you're using the field level encryption, the data is already encrypted. Okay, so, and it's going to stay there. So with encryption, no matter which way you access the data, that data is going to be encrypted. So I'm not really talking about that data when we're talking about secure file transfer. Okay, now it can include that. We can encrypt it twice. But it's more for data that's being sent out to an external, either external group, external system, trading partner, whatever it might be, and that you want to be able to include keys and be able to share, private and public keys, so that when they get the data, they're able to decrypt it on their system. Okay, so I just want to make sure you understand that usually these are two separate things. Okay, now you can transfer, securely encrypted data, and decide that you want to encrypt it twice. That's okay if you want to do that. But if you think about, I need to transfer data, to my bank, to a clearinghouse, a trading partner that, requires, secure transfers, this is the product or this is the technology that you should be looking at. So this talks about all different size customers have this need. So it's not only for the big companies. Any data that has personal information, secured, confidential information needs to be encrypted in the world that we live in now. So Bill talked about a lot of the regulations, and partners demand that the data gets transferred securely. So you may have something in place already. You may be manually setting up file transfers, secure file transfer, that kind of stuff. And starting out small, it's probably fine. But to have a tool in place that's able to work, with, most trading partners, it's customizable to any requirements. Be able to recover, resend data easily, have scripts set up and tested, is a better way to go than doing everything manually. You may miss a step, if you just have a procedure that you're following every time you have to send, you may miss a step or something like that. So having this all within a tool that's kept up to date, maintained and has error handling, error checking, and being able to recover your data and resend, I think is a big benefit. So, maybe I talked a little bit too fast there. Manual, transfer processes are unwieldy, time consuming, resubmitting failures can be tedious. Capturing files from the FTP server and being able to process that data automatically. So that's another feature of the tool, where you may not have that right now, that you bring in a file from an external source and then you have to start a process or transfer the data, whatever it may be. Most of that is set up within the tool. Manual management, is too much for human error, right? So we want to have this down as a process that you're able to depend on, that it's going to work every time. So the benefits, so we are encrypting the data, right? So, there's keys involved. Many different types of encryption are available. Depending on the trading partner, there's different ways of doing things, and the tool has many examples that we're able to implement. There is also APIs. So if there was an existing process and a CL, and maybe it's on the scheduler already, we could add our APIs to that existing stuff, so that it continues the process, and works within our tool as well. So that's that's another capability. It's a mature discipline. There are standards and certifications available for secure file transfer. So some tips. Looking for a solution, it needs to meet the standards and have certifications, and ensure the solution will can navigate the complexities, of firewall configurations. You know, that's something you always need to think about when you're going outside of your network. Having a full audit trail, right? So that's another thing you should be looking for. Of course, our product has it. Being able to retry. So if the other side is down, you know, that it's just not lost, that it lets you know that it did not complete and gives you options to, you know, retry. And being able, you know, to set this up as a hub and spoke so that it can transfer out to many locations, you know, depending on the file or the file type. So our Assure Secure File Transfer product can move data, you know, internally or externally with encryption. It can take, you know, pretty much any type of file. So it could be a database file, flat file, IFS file, save file, spool file, doesn't matter. We're able to transfer that information. It does include encryption of zip and PDF formats. It can transfer in secure shell or secure FTP. Records are all encryption and file transfer meet the compliance requirements for encryption. We also have an option for PGP, which is pretty good privacy. So that's another encryption technology that can be included with this product. And this data can be sent to other platforms. So even though it's originating from the IBM I, doesn't mean it can only go to an IBM I. It can go to Windows, Linux, Unix, it doesn't matter. So with our product, the whole thing is about automating the process, right? So that the data uses policies, and depending on what's been set up, it will send to the appropriate locations. The ability to retransmit and have an archive of the data, providing emails or messages as alerts if things, well, even if it completes normally and you want to get one, or, you know, if it doesn't and you only want problems to be sent. Can be sent to multiple people, right? Distribution lists. And if you wanted to integrate it within your application, you can do that as well. So this is just some of the examples that are already in the product. So it's pretty extensive database of scripts and transfers, you know, banks, insurance companies, medical claims services, EDI networks. So pretty much there's probably something out there that, if not being exactly what you're looking for, it can definitely be a good first step to setting up the trading between the two companies. So this is just getting into more detail. I'm going to go quickly through this, see if we have some time for Q&A. Within the product, we call them FTP definitions. That's where it stores the system, the user ID, the password, which is encrypted, the, you know, local file names, the FTP script, and if you're notifying anyone. And then you have the actions. So this is one of the nice things about the product, is that we're able to scan either a library or a directory for a particular file. So what you can have is your different departments just put their file into a certain library or into a folder, and we will automatically pick it up. right? So depending on the attributes of the file name, we know what it is and what we should do with it, right? So that's part of these policies that you would set up so that it, for a file action, it would be the FTP session. Is it FTP, SFTP, whatever it might be? What SSL options do you want? Do you want even post-processing actions? You might want to, on an inbound, maybe you want to run a program over that data once it comes in and populate your other applications with the data, right? So that's all there for you to work with, and of course, emailing options. So again, some graphics on what it's all about. This is just illustrating that it could be scheduled, it could be off a menu. It's going to process the data depending on what the file looks like. Are we scanning a library or a directory? And then that points to the FTP definition, which then takes it from there. On the FTP definition is, are we logging this information? Are we archiving? Are we emailing? Are we doing PGP? How are we sending out the transfer? And then, is it encrypted or not? That kind of thing. So now I'm going to turn it over to Bill to finish up and see if there's any questions at the end.
So not going to spend too much time on this because honestly, these last couple of slides that I was going to talk to are specifically about the features in our product and the, one second, one more click to be able to take control. Got it now. Okay. These slides, you'll get the slide deck, but these are just summaries. A lot of the points that Rich made were sprinkled about our product within his presentation on the technologies themselves. So with Assure Encryption, the NIST certification is key, the ability to support the multiple key options, and just the connection to all those regulatory requirements that I mentioned earlier. Those are kind of the three pillars of things we want you to remember about Assure Encryption. And then the Alliance Key Manager, which is the key manager that is probably the most popular that Rich talked about that we support. Again, the flexibility we have to support both multiple ones, but also the Alliance one's important. And then finally, there's a secure file transfer product. Again, all about those data in motion challenges that you have. And the big thing to remember on secure file transfer, as Rich pointed out, if the data is already encrypted, you don't need to re-encrypt it necessarily. But there's all that management overhead of managing these processes and these transfers, and also the ability to document and have a process that's auditable and that we pass the audit. Because if you do these things on an ad hoc basis, one-off, manual, you're much more likely to have problems if you're in an audit situation with any of these regulations. So that centralization, management, and control is a huge piece of the value proposition for secure file transfer. So, wanted to move on to any questions that we have. We've got just a couple of minutes, but if you have any questions, please enter them into the Q&A box. I did have a couple that had come in. So this first one is, did the COVID-19 pandemic impact or change the best practices for data privacy? I mean, I'll weigh in here, and if Rich, if you want to throw anything on top, you certainly can, but my feeling on this is that it didn't really change the requirements or the best practices. You should still be doing the same sort of things. What it did do was heighten the amount of attacks and just security bad actors that were out there. There's a lot of security activity that's been generated by COVID-related sort of things, phishing emails, passwords, and trying to get things like that. So it's just been a motivation or a enabling event for data privacy to become more important. But the fundamental practices of it really were the same before or after the pandemic. So I don't really see anything that changed the best practices on that one. Are the regulations you talked about the primary ones that have data privacy requirements? You know, I think I had mentioned this, and maybe not as clearly, but they're not the only ones. I pick those because they're some of the most visible ones, but there's regulations all over the world, and in fact, they're changing all the time, and there's new ones being added all the time. So the one I pointed, there's a new one coming out of Australia. It's a Australia Data Privacy Act that's going to be, again, similar to the California Consumer Act, similar to GDP, but different. So if you're a company that's doing business, in Australia, you're going to have to understand what that regulation is and when it goes into effect later this year. I think is the date. They delayed it partially because of the pandemic issue, so it hasn't fully been deployed yet, but it is coming. And I think I just use that as an example to say these data privacy requirements that are embedded in a lot of these regulations are very pervasive. Most of the regulations out there mention data privacy. And I do want to make the point that these things aren't going away, and they're getting more frequent, and the existing ones change. So it's one of the big challenges that you have, is just staying on top and knowing which regulations you really are subject to. I don't know, Rich, does that meet up with your advice on that?
Yeah, Bill. Yep, you hit it right on the head.
Okay. And it's Brian here. I would just add as well, in Canada, the Canadian Privacy Act, PIPEDA, also is very strong and has been strengthened in the last year or so in terms of breach reporting and penalties and that sort of thing, right? And that directly addresses some of the things that we talked about here today.
Yeah, and I think that's a good example of, it's a regulation that's been out there, but there's, it changes. Things get, new things are added, or new responsibilities are placed on people. So that's something you got to keep watch out for.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we're at the top of the hour, Brian. If we want to close it up, Melanie, I think I'd hand it back to you to close us down.
All right, thank you, Bill. Well, that concludes our webinar. Thank you to all of our presenters today. And as mentioned, we will be sharing the recording of this call, and we will be responding to all questions that we were not able to address via email following this event. So please keep an eye out for an email from the Able One team. And with that, thank you everyone for joining, and we hope everyone has a great day.